Let's get more in depth on multiple triggers and chaining content with triggers. In your FreshAiR Reality, you can have as many triggers as you'd like. In addition, triggers can show more than just one piece of content. They could show first that one piece of content and then chain together subsequent pieces of content in back-to-back screens that are presented to the user. Let's take a look how to do both of these things. First, let's look at some of the triggers we've already created in previous tutorials. I'd like to point out this option on each trigger that says Keep in History with a check mark. The FreshAiR app actually has a history view that lets the user see any previously triggered content. Anything they've already seen in the FreshAiR Reality will go there, as long as that trigger or that content has this check mark marked. This can be helpful to remind your users of certain key parts of a narrative. If you're doing something, for example, that has objectives, this can be very crucial for keeping just those pieces of content that are important available for the user to see in their history view. For other pieces of content that perhaps are transitional pieces of content or that are not that important, you can simply uncheck this box and that content, once seen, will not populate in the history view. So we add more triggers in the way we've done before, by clicking on the Add Trigger button icon in the top left. Here, we'll go about populating our trigger in much the same way. First naming it, then defining what kind of trigger it's going to be, by location or otherwise, and then selecting the actual location in this case. Next, be sure to fill out in which manner you'd like this to be triggered by location, how close in proximity a user needs to be to that location to trigger it, and also whether this trigger is actually clickable from a distance, and if so, how far away a distance. Next, we'll populate content for this trigger in much the same way we've done before, by hovering over the content area and clicking Pick Other. This takes us to our content, where we can select a previously defined piece of content, or in fact, create new on the fly. Once you've found the content you'd like to use, hover over it and click Select. This will take you back to the trigger screen, as we've done before. Again, you can have as many triggers as you'd like in your FreshAiR Reality. Simply click on the new trigger icon each time and continue populating new triggers. You'll notice new triggers are always populated to the far right. And so once you get a few in your FreshAiR Reality, you'll need to scroll left and right to actually view them all. Or you can click this blue arrow tab to see a listing of all your different triggers. From here, you can click on each one to scroll to them. Lastly, a nice option of the FreshAiR Editor in Triggers mode is to switch your view from Details mode, where you see all available details for each trigger, to an Overview mode, where you can just see an overview of all the triggers you've populated so far. Right now, that doesn't look very necessary, as we only have less than a dozen triggers, and none of them with subsequent content past the first piece of content. But with more complicated realities, this could be a real aid for getting a sense from a top level of what your reality's flow looks like. For now, let's put it back on Details mode. Now that we've determined that we can have as many triggers as we'd like, let's show how to populate subsequent content once someone's triggered a trigger and seen the first piece of content. We like to call this chaining content together, and it's very easy to do. You'll notice with each of these trigger boxes, there's a very small plus sign at the very bottom here. If you click on it, this will actually turn in what we call another page of content. Think of pages as where you put content into. In subsequent tutorials, we'll talk about conditions and actions that also are associated with each page. But for now, let's keep it simple. When I start defining the secondary piece of content, or the third, or the fourth, because much like the way you can have as many triggers as you want in a reality, you can chain as many pieces of content as you'd like together in one trigger. What this looks like from the FreshAiR app is, whenever the user triggers a certain trigger by whatever criteria you've defined up here at the top of your trigger, they'll definitely see this first piece of content. They'll hit done on that screen, and if you have any subsequent pieces of content chained together underneath, the very next thing they'll see is that next subsequent content. So let's fill out a couple of these and see how it works. You're going to want to name each one. and then hover over the content area and click Pick Other. It's important to note that if you ever have different pages in your chain and for whatever reason one of them doesn't have content filled out, that is, for the content box it's just left on none or by default, it'll just skip over that content. What I mean by that is exemplified here. We have two pieces of content here, matches, begin mission 1. We have these two empty chained together content pages. Let's actually populate this one here and fill in some content for it. Great. Now thinking through how this is going to work for the user actually playing through your reality, we've defined that this trigger, matches, is going to be triggered at location at the matches location. When that happens, whether they click on it or walk toward it, with whatever criteria you've defined here, they'll see this piece of first content. Then they'll hit the Done button on their screen. Then they'll see this piece of content. Then they'll actually go to this piece of content next, but there's nothing there. It's none. So the FreshAiR app is smart enough to simply show nothing and just continue on if there's any more content chained together, which there is. So to the end user, there'll be a seamless transition from begin mission 1 to wolves. An easy way to think about this workflow is to follow this green line. This green line goes from the very top, where the marker is, and then the content will be shown to the user sequentially as this green line goes from top to bottom, skipping over any content that is none. At this point, go ahead and try out what you've learned on this tutorial on the device. Experiment with different things. Be sure to hit save first. And notice, by the way, that the FreshAiR Editor will actually let you know if there's a problem saving your reality. There's a good reason if there is a problem. In this case, there's a great number of triggers that I haven't actually filled out any locations for. The FreshAiR Editor is smart enough to see this and prompt you to do something about it, because this will result in an unplayable game for the FreshAiR user if they were to try to play this reality as is. So, in the case where you get a problem saving your reality prompt, it's a great best practice to actually click on each of these warnings and go to the highlighted section and resolve the issue in some manner. For location issues, this is resolved by actually determining a location for each of these triggers, or in my case, as I was just experimenting and demonstrating, I'll simply remove these triggers by clicking on the X button. Once all problems are solved, you'll be able to save without any problems at all.